Now, to get with it more in depth, you talked about actually having I think you said it was a 3-year course or a 3-year development cycle for a game that they have to, produce and they make with teams and stuff. So, with that, what makes up development of games?
Oh boy, well it's sure as heck not a you don't have like Bradshaw doing doing a game in like 5 months. You don't have people, you don't have one man, one woman, one cubicle, one game. I mean, and that's the thing that people don't realize. I mean, a lot of, unless you're doing like Flappy Bird, or with one man or one woman team, where you're doing kind of like a Meat Boy thing or something. A lot of indie games are really stressful and so on. And I give those guys and gals a huge salute because they're small teams and stuff. But like, I mean, like Bethesda and Skyrim, I kind of get my numbers mixed up, but they had like 300 people on the core team. It took like 5 years just to get where it is. I mean, it is now a full, in a lot of cases, the big AAA games. I mean, they're full on super movies. I mean, it takes years and years to develop this stuff because it's not just, this is interactive entertainment. That's the thing people don't realize is that it's like D&D. I mean, it's like you have to be ready for what the player is going to do. You can't possibly be ready for every occurrence. So you're sitting there designing everything possible. With a movie, you can set there. Movies are great, but you set a tone and a pace and blah 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 blah. You make a game, you have to be ready for the player on the other side to break it, to test it, to figure out something you didn't think of. You want everybody to go left, but everybody in the team goes right. Well, did I plan for that? Did I go into it? So, it's one of these things where people nowadays are expecting a certain level of quality and a certain level of immersion and a certain level of development that just takes a much longer time. That takes a much longer immersion, takes bigger teams. So if you're working on, like I told you before in our little prep meeting, when I was at GDC, before the pandemic, I was sitting there and I was drawing. There's a guy there, and he was working for Blizzard, and he was one of 60 people for one game. I won't go into all the super details, but every game at Blizzard, he was saying, has at least 3 teams of 20 people of engineers just working on the back end to make sure they're working. That's not to mention all the people that have to do all the stuff up front. I mean, this is just years ago. I mean, there was like 15. I mean, can you imagine writing 1,500 quests and all the NPCs and all the characters and all the ways you have to appeal to people? So, okay, I don't want to wander in the woods, but, game design really involves a super team effort. You have to have a group of programmers, and you have to have multiple levels of programming. From UI to back face to the interface and the back end. You have to have array developers. You have to have all this stuff. You have to have the front end where you're designing characters, you're designing the items, the objects. You have to have musicians and sound and Foley artists. You have to have producers, and you have to have production assistants, and you have to have play testers. I mean, one of our students, Jennifer Kane, got her start in the game industry by being a game tester. You have to work 40 hours a week testing the game, seeing what's broken, what's not. That goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, we see, and that is the thing we suffer from today. People still think that games can be produced in, just a couple of weeks. I still have people that come into game one with Unreal, and they think we're going to make a full game in 16 weeks. And I'm like, whoa, hey, they want to make like Halo 16. I'm like, well, let's see if we can put the tree in, and you make the moving platform, and then we'll see what you do. And they're like, oh, that's I can't. And then in the semester, like, oh, if I teach anything in my classes, it's like a real respect for what in the world it takes to make a game. You know what I mean? So, I mean, you saw that in prototyping. What it makes just to make a board game that is actually fun and even and appeals to a lot of people and isn't broken. You remember that we play it and we test it, and then all fun, and you're like, hey, this game's perfect. 5 minutes, it's broken.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? You remember that? I mean, then you're like, oh, I got to redo everything. So
Yeah.
The thing about it, so like in our classes, like I said, that's why I've made the advanced game and the creature classes multiple times, because in college you just kind of get blah 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 blah. You need a chance to really gestate what you've learned, to execute it, to flex your muscles, make something, apply what you've learned, test it, and then be able to iterate. That is the key thing that is critical for any game. And that's why you see a lot of modern games. We talk about Cyberpunk, and then there's No Man's Sky, and there's all these other, and Duke Nukem, the 2000, whatever, Duke Nukem 3D. I mean, the thing that you need in a game is iteration. You must finish, play, break, rebuild, and people are not patient for that. So that's one thing I would say that people don't really understand is how much takes going into this game or into a game, because it's not, you have to set up a scene. And then here's the thing, Samir and Samir and everybody out there, you can do everything perfect. It looks gorgeous, looks wonderful, looks everything, but then it's not fun. Then you got to go fun hunting. You got to figure, is this fun? It looks gorgeous, looks great, but it's boring as hell. You know, I mean, what do you do with that? Then you just got to make it fun. There are some games that look and just sound awful, but they're so fun to play. You know, like my daughter we have Goat Simulator, a plushie of that in the other room because they love Goat Simulator so much. That was just a leaked game of a goat with a tongue, and now it's a full-on series.
Yep.
You know? Mm-hmm. I'll shut up, but I mean, really, the one thing to answer your question is just the time and the resources and the people needed for any basic game nowadays.